Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's Lionel. I'm your host for LT Productions. I'm coming to you not with a television show, not with anything gossip news or something that's in the blogs right now. I'm coming to you with an experience that I had. So you might as well call me a blogger today. But I wanted to share my experience in watching a Broadway musical that came to my city that's on tour right now. Ain't Too Proud, which is the life and times of the Temptations. I appreciate everyone who comes to my channel. Please like this video. Also, you can subscribe if you are new. Welcome aboard. And leave your comments below. Now let's get into this. As you can see, I'm rocking some of the souvenirs that you can get from there. You know, I'm I love it. I loved what I actually was able to experience. I'm glad that I had a chance to just get out and do something for myself anyways. But I love the theater. I love the arts. I love performances. I love musicals, all that good stuff. Just to let you know, I am a huge fan from the music from the 60s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and I'm throwing in the 90s too, because that's my generation there. The most. There's other stuff from the 2000s, but But growing up, I think what attracted me to it, my mom, every morning that she would get up and she would have the radio station playing while she's getting ready for work, and you could hear everything. So I'm not just connected to things per se R&B. I heard all the rock and roll stuff, the pop stuff. I love the Beach Boys. I love Patsy Cline. She's more of the country side and all that good stuff. I loved it all. I loved Elvis, and all that good stuff. So, hey. So, The Temptations is one of my favorite groups anyways. I did travel to the Kravis Center. This is where it was held. This is in West Palm Beach, Florida. Um, I'll just give you the audience genre, or I don't know what to call it. Um, the audience range. Basically, uh, it wasn't a bunch of people in my age. That would be the millennial age. No, and I understood that, for whatever reason, I've been attracted to some of the older stuff, even as a child. I'd watch Nick at Night, and that's when you saw the Lucy Show, Bewitched, Happy Days, Mr. Ed, the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Dick Van Dyke, all of them. I watched all of that and have been a fan of that. Three's Company, all that good stuff. Of course, now like Fresh Prince, a Bel Air, and Friends are on Nick at Night. I said, what? That's my childhood. What in the world? But anyways, they even got Big Bang Theory. I was like, well, didn't they just go off the air like 5 years ago? But whatever. Um, yeah. So the Temptations is top notch to me. Of course, we know the classic "My Girl," all that good stuff. Of course, the title is "Ain't Too Proud to Beg," which is one of their songs. Ain't too proud to beg, and you know it. Please don't leave me, girl. Yeah, so that's a good song, a very classic also. So, anyways, I get into this play. Didn't know what to expect, but was excited. I'm a big fan of Motown artists. I used to study a lot of Motown music and their artists. I studied Berry Gordy and all of that. I did have dreams of having my own record label, and I wanted to model it how Motown. And I think that they did have a perfect process as far as molding their artists and presenting them to the world. That's just my opinion, and all that good stuff. And I think that they had something for a very long time that they worked with. But anyways, the play, it's based upon Otis Williams. Otis Williams is the original surviving member of Temptations. The rest have already passed on, if you do not know. Have y'all watched the movie? I think that was back in, 98, 99? I watched it a gazillion times. And I'm sure you can see watch it on a streaming platform. I think it's on Tubi. If not, I know it's on YouTube. But y'all need to check it out. But it was very, very great. We got to see Leon as David Ruffin, and nobody come to see Otis, all that good stuff. That's still a catchphrase to this day. All that good stuff. So, anyways. So it's based upon his book, which was also how the movie was. What I will say is that which I think is rare, that stage play was able to catch stuff that the movie did not. I think it was a miniseries. They had a part one and part two, if I remember correctly. In this play, a lot of people had complaints and had thoughts. Okay, well, we're just getting Otis Williams' view, and the movie made him seem more like the hero, and the rest of the people were villains, except for Blue, his best friend. On this one, I really feel like Otis was portrayed as human. Like, no, I got into some dirt also. But let's get into it. Otis is from Texas, and he was raised with his strict grandmothers. He came up north when he was in his teens and started getting into trouble. Um, at one time, he got locked up in jail. During that time, he swore he wasn't going to do anything anymore. I think he was in juvenile detention at the time, and they let him out. Otis came out, saw one of his groups that he really loved, and got so inspired by that and inspired to be a singing group or be an artist with a singing group. And then he collected most of the members of the Temptations. They went through a few members before they actually got everything right for the right balance and chemistry. Some things that I really didn't know because they didn't talk about it in this way. Otis, who did get married to his wife at the time, I know that they're divorced, Josephine. Of course, we saw him chase after Josephine and needed to ask her mother to speak with, I think to date her or whatever. But I think at the time on the movie, the mom was like, Josephine, you need to get in the house, while he was trying to rap to her, trying to. So from the movie, they didn't discuss this, but we find out that Otis was overage. Josephine was underage when they were dating. And then he got her pregnant. And his mama was not for you just making babies out there. You need to get married. Of course, during that time, this is the 50s and 60s. Shotgun weddings was the solution to all of this stuff. Of course, some, if you have money, would probably make heavy babies. Shout out to Rodney DeVoice. But in this case, no. So really, they had to hurry up and get married fast for many reasons. And one is because of her age. And they had to go on and get a marriage license because this could have been considered statutory, RAPE. I said, ooh, okay. So we know all the logistics of how the group formed, the real Temptations. We know that they were Otis Williams in the Distance. That manager took the name back, the clothes, da-da-da-da-da. They wanted more money, da-da-da-da-da, if you watch the movie. And then Otis finally meets Berry Gordy in the bathroom. And he was able to get Berry to allow a meeting. But he had to change the name. And they ended up coming up with the Temptations. The originals consisted of Paul Williams, Eddie Kendricks, Melvin Franklin, a.k.a. Blue, of course, Otis. They did have Al. Sir, ma'am, they, and them. I will tell you this much. The one that played Al on this play, no joke. No joke as far as his singing ability. Oh my God. And who's his name? I got it here. I got the playbill. Feels like I'm skipping over some stuff. Oh. Who's the one that played Al? Okay, his name is Robert Crenshaw. Now, how they set it up with the play versus the movie. They were at some type of New Year's bash. Al was still part of the group before David came. So I'm just setting it up that way. In the play, in the movie, Al was the one that didn't want to continue on stage. So like they performed, and then afterwards they go into the dressing room, and then Al said, I'm not going back on and the rest of the group wanted to. But in the play, it was the opposite. Al still wanted to go on. And the rest of the group said, no, we're tired. Da, 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 da. Him and Paul Williams got into a fight, and he busted a glass over Paul. Now, I've read this and all that, but Otis, who was the narrator, who was played by, or is played by Rudy Foster in the play, said, no, the bottle was just about to take out, whatever the fight that happened, that the bottle was about to take the eye out of Paul. I said, oh. So they let him go. And then you would think, okay, so why didn't they try to work with Al like they worked with David for a while? And I think because the brotherhood had not really been cemented yet. And you'll find out more about that when David comes in, it's just like there's a camaraderie of brothers that decided that they're going to be family, all for one for all that good stuff. So I think that that was the only reason why Al didn't stay. But Robert Crenshaw, you a singing fool. That's all I gotta say. David joins and all that good stuff. They talk about Jimmy Ruffin, who was his older brother that had his own solo career, I think, on Motown. And then, of course, David. Nobody can sing like David. Da 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 da. And we know all that good stuff. So as time went on, David seemed to be more difficult because it became kind of this David Ruffin and the Temptations type of stuff. However, a lot of people were against getting rid of him in the group, but things kind of changed. It was this thing of Otis and Blue were always on the same side, which they really did not like coming out of Blue, because it's like, do you have your own mind? You always go for whatever Otis has to say, and Blue would always say, well, it's for the betterment for the group. Shelly, what was his last name? I know his name. Shelly Berger. At this point in the game, Shelly Berger came in and he became a good representation that allowed the group to cross over. Now we're going to get into more of the politics within the music and what was going on in the world at the time. He was able to get the Temptations into Copacabana to perform on American Bandstand. If you do not know what American Bandstand is, it's like the white version of Soul Train. I think American Bandstand was first, but hey, where you just featured groups and all that good stuff. And they just reached a success internationally, da-da-da-da-da-da. David was a problem. They decided to vote him out of the group. They brought in a new singer, which is Dennis Edwards, another singing fool. We know David was a singing fool, which was portrayed by Josiah Travis Kent Rogers. And oh my God. Where's Dennis? Dennis Edwards. He was portrayed by Jamal Stone. Another singing fool. But anyways, around the time that Dennis came along, it became less you could say pop soul, and it came into more of this R&B kind of rough funk that was going on. And at that time, Motown had strategic, writers and all that good stuff. They switched from Smokey Robinson writing all the songs for Temptations to introducing Norman Whitfield. Norman Whitfield, around this time, the Vietnam War was going on. The Temptations wanted to speak out about it. Barry Gordy, he forbid that. And Barry Gordy had this policy of, no, you're musical artists, you don't need to get into politics, da 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 da. We don't need all that. At the same time as Motown was crossing over to a white audience, also with the black audience, a lot of black folks did not like Motown. They felt like they were selling out. But they wanted to speak out on the war. Barry forbid it. Norman wrote this song called War that eventually went to Edwin Starr. War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. You know that song? So since Barry Gordy didn't want the Temptations to have it, Edwin Starr did it, and it became #1 on the Billboard Hot charts. I think for like 3 weeks in a row, weeks in a row or whatever. Got #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 charts in 1970. And it's also one of the most popular protest songs ever. So after really taking the L on that, Barry Gordy allowed another song to come forth, Ball of Confusion. But also Edwin Starr, I guess he was the original star that sung that song too. But however, it caught on more with the Temptations, Ball of Confusion. People moving out, people moving in, because of the color of their skin. That song. And they did well with that. So I thought it was very interesting because of the bad rap that a lot of Motown artists were getting, but they really wanted to say something more, but they just were not allowed to do it. We know Marvin Gaye later on. Well, he was. Now, there's a book that I read and studied, which I'll post around on my screen now, Motown, whatever it was. But I think I still have this book. But anyways, Marvin Gaye was a rebel in the game, and he's talked about a lot in this book. But he went against the grain, and of course he had his own protest song. What's going on? That song, yeah. I guess I got to back up because I already told you about Dennis or whatever. But there's another artist that was on Motown's roster, Tammy Terrell. David Ruffin was involved with her. Also, James Brown was, if you did not know that. But they had a very bad relationship. A lot of whatever David grew up around has manifested in him, and he ended up inflicting Tammy a lot. There was a lot of domestic violence that was going on. And Tammy Terrell ended up passing away at 24. I would love a documentary on Tammy Terrell, and I don't think people are ready for that. In a way, it'll kind of sound crazy, but how men treated her within the music industry really needs to be talked about, in my opinion. So as the Temptations were climbing the ladder, they had competition. The Supremes. We found out in another book that I read, I think that's in the Motown book, we find out probably around the 1970s, Berry Gordy moved away from Detroit. That's where Motown was based in. And he moved to LA. And he was getting into movies and all of that. As we know, so a few movies that he made. The Billie Holiday story with Diana Ross in it, Mahogany, The Wiz, and The Last Dragon. Shout out to all those movies. But anyways, there was this competition of who was greater and all that good stuff. Now, I do remember reading in a book that Berry Gordy, at least in the 70s, was only interested in really putting his heart and soul. I think he was actually managing those two groups specifically, which were the Supremes and the Jackson 5. All the other artists started falling by the wayside. Otis went to Berry a lot of times because he wanted more creative control. The group wanted. Like, we got some songs we wanted to write. And Berry said, no, we got a regimen that we're going to stick to. That's similar to what was told on the Jacksons, The American Family. Remember that? A movie, biopic, back in the 90s, early 90s. Go to bed, Joseph! You know. That starred, B, Angela Bassett, and all that good stuff. So, yeah. That was discussed. I always thought that, at least how it was portrayed, that Joe Jackson was just a hater. And he did not like the influence that Berry had over his children. But they also wanted more creative control. They just didn't want to be singing robots. You just do this and da-da-da-da. We get it. I think Stevie Wonder was the first one to break out of that mode. And they basically had to allow him to do his thing while he was at Motown. Yeah. So Dennis Edwards. They talked about him not becoming another David, at least as far as what Otis was saying. He left the group at first in 1977. That's when Motown moved to Atlantic Records. I didn't know this, but Motown wanted to go on strike. At least most of the members did, except for Otis. Otis was kind of the buffer that was the go-to person to try to get Berry to do what they want done, or to see if they could get help in this and all that. Berry wasn't really letting up. And I think at the time they were speaking with Shelley and not just like Berry at the time. Anyways, they did end up leaving and they moved to Atlantic Records. Dennis Edwards, he came back to the group when Motown decided to come back to Motown. I guess it wasn't a better deal. I have to do a little bit more research in regards to that. Then I guess he left again and returned when Motown had their reunion tour, which was in 1982, and then he left again in 1983. At that point, he was having a good run of solo and produced a few songs out there. I do know those songs, but I can't remember at this moment. He returned back in 1987 and left for good in 1989. And never stuck. I guess he just never stuck after a while, Of course, they talked about Papa was a Rolling Stone. Papa was a Rolling Stone. Mm-hmm. Wherever he laid his hat was his home. And when he died, all he left us was alone. I like to say alone, A-L-O-N-E, and A-Lone in many cases. A lot of y'all don't have insurance and all that good stuff. Get some insurance so people don't have to suffer after you're gone. So the group was, this is a Norman Whitfield song. the group was really against it. Some people felt like Dennis was just really extreme because the song, it was the 3rd of September. That is the day that his daddy died. So it feels like Norman was taking his life and putting it in the song, but denying that that was the case. The whole group was against it, and that day they were kind of was told in the play is that Barry said, "No, you're going to record it." So they tried to do the worst possible job when recording it. They were so angry and all that. However, guess what? They did it, and it was an instant hit for the group. So I guess that anger that they had was put passionate into that song, and it became such a great hit. I think they were also upset because of how long the instrumental was, because I think, what is it, like 6 minutes or 9 minutes? I forget how long it is, but yeah. Um, yeah, but they were going on strike because Motown wasn't really paying the artist. It's like Motown was cooping more than what the artist was doing, and they didn't think that that was right. Um, and then, oh, I got to tell you about this. So in the meantime, when Dennis was there, first replaced David Ruffin, David couldn't let go of the group. So as you saw in the movie, he would come and interrupt their set while they are doing whatever on stage. They did in this play something so remarkable and amazing. They had this like battle between Dennis and David. Of course, nobody, as far as the audience, knew all of that was going on. It was orchestrated like David would come in and sing a verse, and then Dennis would snatch the mic in disgust or whatever, or angerment, and sing his verse, and then David would snatch the mic again. It was phenomenal. It was such a great scene to see. We get to the second half. All I can say is I did not have a dry eye. The second half is when they get a little bit more intense, and we start seeing that the group is declining. Some of the members are declining. Eddie wanted to go. He didn't like that. He felt like Otis was against the group by wanting to do what he wanted to do and not really wanting to accept David back into the group. Look at how things are going. He did not like that how he felt that they weren't really sticking up for Paul. Paul had sickle cell anemia, but he also had a problem with alcohol and dealt with depression. And after a while, Paul just couldn't make it. Eddie was not tolerating it. He was like, give him a little more time. Don't take him out of the group. And they were like, well, there's nothing they could really do. They ended up bringing back old member Richard something to sing his parts while he was kind of just lagging back in the back, as we saw in the movie. Eddie eventually left, and then the group became two groups. This is somewhat similar as to what's going on with Escape right now, with Candy, Latasha, Tiny, and the other sister, my lord. But y'all know who I'm talking about. Although the Temptations of the Temptations, you could still use the name because it wasn't just formed by one person within the group. So Eddie Kendricks and David, they came up with their own Temptation group. I think for a while, Dennis even came over there. It was quite crazy. But anyways, after a while, they came up with, let's do a reunion tour. But before they go there, Paul Williams ended up ending his life, which was sad. I think that for a while that there was a lot of animosity between everyone within the group. And for one day that they were actually civil for each other was at Paul's funeral. Now the reunion tour. Everyone was there. Everything seemed to be going well. David, everybody's on cue. While they were on tour one day, all the group members except for Otis were getting high. David started missing rehearsals and all that good stuff all over again. Now, what was said, which I think was good for Otis, they said, you would use drugs and all that stuff. He said, yeah, but I knew that I had to still get up and do all that. I knew I couldn't get so involved into it like that because somebody had to stand firm. And I appreciate Otis putting that in there because it's like, what did you do? Because you act like you didn't do nothing. Yeah, it looked like you were cheating on your wife or whatever, but that was kind of glazed over in the movie, in my opinion. And it just looked like everyone else was just doing stuff, blah, 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 blah. So the reunion tour basically came to a screeching stop at that point. We talked about David Ruffin's demise. he was in a crack house or drug house, I'll say that much, and had been already unalived for whatever, and someone ended up dropping him off at the hospital. I was in tears. I was in tears. Eddie Kendricks, he passed away from lung cancer. Of course, Eddie Kendricks was a smoker and all that good stuff. I think that him and Otis made amends before he passed away. Then Melvin Franklin, which is Blue. He had rheumatoid arthritis. He was still performing, and the doctors was giving him cortisone. Over time, that cortisone ended up giving him complications to his body. He also had diabetes and necrotic. I don't know. I'm not even gonna say the word no more. So, towards the end of his life, he had a series of seizures, ended up falling into a coma, and then passed away from heart failure. I'm gonna say this: I don't think that, at least back then, and it's not much greater now, I don't think that doctors put a lot of interest in the health of Black people. They was feeding him that cortisone, and possibly also because of his fame, Melvin was able to demand that be his resource of solutions so that he can still get on stage. Whatever you want to think about it, whatever you want to say about it, that could be possibly a risk, probably an option as to what was going on with his health. However, I don't feel like doctors take care of Black people like that, and that's why they were just feeding him cortisone. But yeah, so he passed away. And the thing that broke my heart, now Otis and his son he had with Josephine, they were distant. Otis always felt like he had to work. And I think there was a pressure to make sure that he succeeded. Coming from the Midwest, Detroit, you in Detroit specifically, in the South, you're going to be a worker farmer. In the North, you just might as well get a job at, was it General Motors that was up there? Being a singer, what? Like, no, that doesn't happen. And you need to get a job. You need to take care of your wife, and that's just that. I think the pressure to stay successful and stay on top was there, and he neglected his child. He said when they weren't on tour, he would spend all his time, but that wasn't enough. Lamont began to resent him. So they really didn't have a great relationship. So in his early 20s, Lamont, who worked construction, he was doing construction on a tall building or whatever, and ended up falling. And that ended up unaliving him. Broke my heart. Otis has been asked in interviews, and I'd be like, oh, why'd they ask that? If there was a temptation that he would bring back, and he said none of the members I would bring back. He said he'd bring back his son. That was hard to hear, as far as knowing the regret and what he wants back into his life. I know that was hard for him. I know that was hard. Otis gets a solo. Now, in the movie, I love how they orchestrated this, because, we don't ever hear Otis singing lead on anything. Y'all let me know if y'all have, But anyways, Otis gets a solo. I thought that was really, really, really cool. Yeah, there wasn't a dry eye, at least in my section of where I was sitting during the second half. I loved it. It inspires me and aspires me. I am older, and I've always had dreams of being on Broadway. And a lot of things I feel like just don't encourage me to do it because of my age. I'm not in my 60s. No offense or anything to that nature, but it's just like, has my time passed? But there's so many reminders out there that the time hasn't passed. I don't know about the whole record label thing because of how music is being run. I would love to put out an EP one of these days just to say I did it. And I would love to just get on stage and do my big one if I can, or just to be on stage. That would be so cool on Broadway, or if I can make it in local, something, that's still my heart's desires. But I really enjoyed this play, this musical. You guys, shout out to the cast, the crew. I loved it, and it just put fuel in me to want to be greater and to do better and to obtain some of the dreams that I've had since I was a little boy. That's all I do have. If y'all have time, if it's in your city, go to it. Now, this is their second tour that they've done around the country. They had this musical first started in California in Berkeley's Theater in 2017. Then it moved to Broadway in 2019. They've been nominated for 12 Tony Awards on Broadway. and in 2019 won for best choreography. That also, I said that they were singing fools. The choreography, tens. That's all I do have. Hopefully you enjoyed what you've heard from me. Hopefully you are inspired. Temptations was nothing to play with. And congratulations to Otis Williams. He's still out there. They've had a total of 27 members in total since since the 1960s. Anthony Grant, whom we've seen in a lot of Tyler Perry films or plays, he's a part of the group now. I said, oh, and his wife is on Beyond the Gates. And you know who that is? That is the girl, Sheila, no, Dana Leslie. That's his wife. I said, okay, go ahead. But yeah, congratulations to all the success. I'm always a fan, and thank you, Otis, for allowing them to show a different side of you and allow us to see a human side to you. And y'all keep doing what you're doing. That's all I do have. You have a great week, you all. And let's let July be the greatest time of our lives and for the rest of this year. Until next time, peace.